Our format this evening is that we will hear from all of our speakers and then we will take questions from the audience. So please enter your questions, type them into the chat, and we will get to as many as we can. So just the co-host, this is co-hosted by Blessed Child Community Association, East Sacramento Preservation, Elmhurst Neighborhood Association, Meadowview, North Natomas Community Coalition, Natomas Community Association, and Save Sacramento Neighborhoods. So I am going to start with just an overview of these densification proposals and talk about some of the community concerns and impacts, and then we will move to our other speakers. So first of all, I just want to do a very brief overview of the general plan, upzoning SB 9 and SB 10. So as most people know, the Sacramento's draft general plan proposes to allow up to 6 units on what is now one single family lot. This increase in density is often called upzoning. The general plan also calls for eliminating requirements that on-site parking be provided. This means that residents of new units would park on the street. SB 9 is a statewide mandate that says that cities must permit single family lots to be split and allows up to a potential of 8 units on what is now one single family lot. SB 9 also reduces rear and side yard setbacks to 4 feet and eliminates requirements for on-site parking on most lots, and it cuts out public input. It takes effect in 2 months from today, January 1, 2022. SB 10 is not a mandate, but gives cities the option to allow up to 14 units on what is now one single family lot with no environmental review or public input. It also takes effect in January. There are a number of other housing related laws that also impact existing neighborhoods. We can't get to all of those, but there might be time during the Q&A for people to ask questions. But really, for more information, please go to United Neighbors. So I want to just quickly summarize some of the community concerns. There are significant concerns about, and of course, objections to some of these densification of existing neighborhoods. Just briefly, one of the objections is that these proposals eliminate single family zoning and the single family neighborhoods that in fact people of all economic and racial groups live in and want. It's true, people can still have single family houses. This isn't about eliminating single family houses, but moderate density, predominantly single family neighborhoods will over time be replaced by higher density neighborhoods with more and more multifamily rental units and fewer home ownership opportunities. Densification, of course, means more impact on infrastructure. By eliminating requirements that on-site parking be provided, there will be more parked cars on streets where parking on both sides is already causing congestion and making it increasingly difficult for people to park where they live. You're going to hear from another speaker about impacts on trees and also issues regarding affordability. One of the last community concerns I want to mention is that public input is really being cut out of the process. The proposed general plan, SB 9 and 10, allow these densified developments by right. By right is, of course, an entitlement. So that means that these projects can be administratively approved and they are not subject to public hearing. So the bottom line on that really is that neighbors don't have much to say about some of these proposals. Okay. I also want to mention the issue about whether we need to upzone existing single family neighborhoods. In fact, in Sacramento, there really isn't any missing middle housing. Currently, single family R1 zoning provides for duplexes on corners, and state law accessory dwelling units or ADUs on any residential lot. With SB 9, which is it says my internet is unstable. Hopefully it's working. With SB 9, duplexes will be allowed on any lot. So you add in the 2 ADUs and those duplexes become 4plexes. So that is the missing middle housing. There are some measures that the city can take to protect neighborhoods from some of the most significant impacts, particularly of SB 9 and 10, as well as the general plan. So briefly, the general plan needs to recognize the value of preserving existing single-family neighborhoods. As already mentioned, people of all racial and ethnic groups want the choice to live in and raise children in single-family neighborhoods. In terms of equity, rather than suggesting that everybody in Sacramento should or even wants to live in Land Park, really the city needs to take the steps to assure that all of Sacramento's neighborhoods are desirable places to live with safe streets, good schools, trees, parks, and other amenities. The city should pass a resolution that clearly states it will not implement SB 10. Again, that would allow up to 14 units on what is now one single family lot. The city also needs to pass an emergency ordinance, and we're going to hear more about that both from planners and from Councilmember Harris. That ordinance could help reduce some of the worst impacts of SB 9, which I'll elaborate in a minute. This ordinance has to be in place by January 1. And in terms of protective measures, it's also absolutely crucial that the city convene a working group to develop this emergency ordinance, and that this working group formally include those who will be affected. This was not the case with the housing element, whose working group included developers but excluded neighborhood associations. Planning commissioners noted the lack of public involvement in the development of the ADU ordinance. Let's not repeat these mistakes. Densification has serious impacts on neighborhoods. Neighborhood associations and advocates must be recognized, included as legitimate stakeholders and formally involved in policy development. I'm just going to briefly mention some of the provisions which this emergency ordinance could include to help protect Sacramento neighborhoods. One thing, cap the number of SB 9 units at 4 units. Rather than allowing the additional units. This can be done by not allowing ADUs to be built on the lots that are split under SB 9. Set maximum lot coverage requirements so that lots are not completely covered with buildings or hardscape. Not allow deviations from the 4-foot setbacks. 4 feet is already pretty small, and anything less will cause even more infringement on adjacent homes. Fully utilize objective zoning, subdivision, and design standards to protect neighborhoods, infrastructure, and trees. Require that developers pay development fees related to impacts those additional units will have. Unfortunately, SB 9 doesn't help us with parking, but the city can require and encourage on-site parking wherever possible. A couple other considerations, consider adjusting the height limits. If you allow a 35-foot building next to, with a 4-foot setback, it greatly impinges on neighboring houses. And then requiring parcels be at least 1,200 square feet. And finally, consider allowing that at least one of the units under SB 9 have to be affordable. So that concludes my presentation, and I'm going to introduce our first speaker, who is Chris Jones. And Chris is a city council candidate in District 5 who lives in Colonial Heights. Chris.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Can everyone hear me clearly? All right, looks good. So I am going to take just a little bit of your time to talk about affordability concerns when it comes to increasing density in neighborhoods. A lot of the argument surrounding why we should do this is to help make housing more affordable for people, which is a noble goal, and it's really important to do because everyone knows that in California, we have a dire shortage of affordable housing. We need more. That no one's disputing that. However, just increasing the density of our neighborhoods does not by itself do anything to address the issues of affordability, and in fact, often makes that problem worse. There is no affordability requirement for SB 9. It mandates an increase in the density, but doesn't really say anything as far as what those homes should cost and how much people are going to spend out of their hard-earned paychecks to live there. And on top of that, we've seen in other places that have gone on to do upzoning, that they've seen a lot of negative effects and not as many of the positive effects that we're hoping to see. In New York City, they saw increased costs and gentrification that resulted in a reduction of the non-white population of areas between 5 and 9% on average. That means the idea that, hey, we're gonna reverse the legacy of redlining. We're gonna allow more people of color to move into higher resource areas. That's not what we saw happen in New York when they did this upzoning. Also, as far as pricing is concerned, in Chicago, Yonah Freemark did a study that showed that upzoning by itself increases prices in the short term because multifamily zone land is worth more than single family zone land. So the underlying land price increasing drives up real estate prices. In Minneapolis, another city that's famous for essentially eliminating single family zoning like we're looking to do, they saw that prices went up between 3 and 5% on affected parcels. And I quote from the study that plan-related price increases are larger in inexpensive neighborhoods and for properties that are small relative to their immediate neighbors. So in non-academic speak, that means it gets worse in lower income neighborhoods. Prices go up across the board, but it hurts the people who need the affordable housing the most. And then in Vancouver, another city that's famous for increasing its density, Patrick Condon, a well-respected city planner and a professor of urban planning, he found that, again, adding density by itself doesn't address housing costs. He said, in all the cases that I've examined throughout North America, what happens when you do a rezoning is you let the hungry dogs of land price speculation and inflation loose across the landscape with the intention of enhancing affordability. Now, again, to take that out of academic speak and make that plain, is that we allow increased density and developers or people with deep enough pockets to afford the construction, they come in, they buy up the areas, they build it out for rent, and they charge what the market will bear. And the price of housing or per square foot just goes up to whatever it is the market will bear. So I think I'm running out of time, but in conclusion, we need to craft a Sacramento City ordinance that does not just simply allow the state level ordinances to go into effect, but is very intentional and targeted towards what we can do to prevent displacement and actually accomplish the goals of providing enough affordable housing for the people who live in Sacramento and the people who will move here in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. Greatly appreciate those remarks and look forward to the questions. Our next speaker is Kate Riley, who is a representative of Trees for SAC. She is the co-chair of the River Park Tree Canopy, and she is a member of the Urban Forest Plan Advisory Group. Kate.
Hi there. I am trying to screen share right now. Let's see if that works. Screen share content. There we go. Do you see it? Does everybody see it?
Yes.
Yep.
Great. Thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm glad to be here to represent Trees for Sacramento. I'm so glad that there's so many people here, and it's good to see the council member and the city staff here as well. Thanks for putting this together. So I want to talk about tree canopy and upzoning. I'm a newcomer to the upzoning issue, and I don't have the expertise of the other people who are speaking, but I do want to talk specifically about tree canopy. Sacramento, like so many cities, has three crises it's facing: environmental justice, the climate change crisis, and also an affordable housing shortage and homelessness. And these crises are related. Particularly an urban forest addresses the effects of climate change crisis and the environmental justice crisis by improving public health in a variety of ways. Housing changes affect the possibility of building urban forest. In the footprint of new housing, trees cannot be preserved and new trees can't be planted. So increased residential density can therefore reduce existing and future tree canopy, having a special impact in low, hello. Oh dear. There we go. There. Low canopy areas. So we're waiting for a new urban forest master plan, and we presume it's going to set a new citywide canopy goal. Per city information, about 80% of our existing tree canopy is on private property, primarily residential. And that's an important figure to think about, because in terms of growing the urban, the tree canopy, we have to emphasize residential options. So preserving and expanding residential canopy is critical. Now, one of the things about the urban forest master plan is it's going to be presumably have an emphasis on planting in low canopy areas, because, and we'll see that there's a lot of inequity in the existing tree canopy. Losing canopy space in yards will make the tree canopy goals impossible, well, or at least difficult to meet. So if Sacramento wants to meet its canopy goals, we have to minimize the loss of backyard planting space. So let's see. There's a lot of data on public health, and as I've been preparing this and getting input from other members of Trees for Sacramento, there are so many effects. I just thought I would, I'd kind of talk about an overall study that kind of tried to collect all of the kind of the existing research, and the areas that are affected by tree canopy, harm reduction, restoring capacity, and building capacity are all represented in the research. It basically, tree canopies reduce air pollution, reduce UV radiation, and clearly, obviously, reduce heat exposure. It also, tree canopies restore attention, mental health, and provide for stress reduction. And then they literally have been shown to improve public health outcomes like birth statistics, active living, and weight status. And that's the study that was the overall study that of those effects. So how does upzoning affect tree canopies? New units use space, which is either being used or could be used for tree canopy. It's basically a zero-sum game. You have dirt, you cover it with a building, you can't plant a tree. It's kind of that simple. And we do know of at least one instance where the city has issued a permit to remove a private protected tree in order for, at least according to the information on the urban forest website, in order to put in an ADU. And the thing to remember is environmental justice neighborhoods that are historically low canopy, they start with less canopy. So when you upzone an EJ neighborhood, you make it even more difficult for them to catch up with the other areas. We're going to talk about that inequity in a later slide. So building multiple units obviously precludes canopy tree planting in that area. Trees need water, sun, and a lot of space, both for the canopy and for the roots. And new multiple units will permanently preclude additional canopy in and near their footprint. So I wanted to talk about urban canopy and environmental justice. So the data I'm going to be talking about here came from a study that was done for the city in preparation of the Urban Forest Master Plan update. It's by Davey in 2018. The overall city canopy, 19.1% of the land area, not a very good percentage, I'm going to have to say, nothing I'm proud of. And that the canopy does vary widely between neighborhoods. As you'll see here, the South Area Community Plan area, their canopy coverage as of 2018 was 14.76% versus Land Park is 47.17%. A wide disparity. A lot of reasons for that, but we're starting from that point. We have an inequity. So the hard part is, how do we work with these new bills and also with the city general plan and ordinances on this issue of meeting the canopy goals. So looking at the state laws, we found kind of two possible ways to get into that. One is like either putting some tree canopy language in objective zoning or design standards, and you can do that, as I'm sure the planning guys will be able to tell us all more on this too, but it seems possible to include objective, not subjective, zoning and design standards that have to do with preserving canopy. And the other way of doing it is to talk about canopy as a public health, an unavoidable, like hurting public health is an unavoidable adverse impact and therefore can have an effect on whether or not there's a ministerial approval of an application. So two elements that we think are important are, one is to assess all canopy providing trees on the proposed infill sites, not just the current, not just private protected trees, but because honestly, private protected trees are pretty big. I mean, they have a very big trunk size, but a lot of trees provide canopy that do not meet that standard. So we believe that we should look into requiring an assessment of all the existing canopy providing trees on that infill site, and then create something like a residential space canopy set aside for public health, which it would be based on canopy goals within that community planning area, and to ensure setbacks allow for planting of canopy trees and preserve existing canopy trees regardless of size of trunk. If there is no existing canopy, do a set aside based related to the canopy goal for that area. So those are just some ideas. Obviously, a lot of work to be done on this, but we do believe that tree canopy preservation and growth needs to be a critical part of the implementation of the emergency statute and also of the general plan. Thank you, and I'll be happy to take questions later.
Thank you, Kate. Oops, I am muted. Thank you,
Oops.
Kate. So we're running a little bit behind, but our next speakers are Evan Compton and Matt from the city of Sacramento. And I believe, Evan, that you want to screen share. Thank you very much, Kate.
Hopefully everyone can see this. Let's see. Can everyone see this? My name is Evan Compton. I'm a planner at the city of Sacramento. And so for implementing SB 9, the regulations apply to single family zones, which has previously been said. So within the city of Sacramento, that would be the rural estates RE and the single unit dwelling zone, which is R1. Also, the site cannot be located in a historic district or on a parcel that's shared with a landmark. There's also some other requirements as shown here from the state law. So this will reduce the number of potential sites where a property owner could submit an application. Any application for SB 9 received by the city will be routed to the neighborhood associations as a part of the city review. The project site will also be posted. Project applications and the plans will be visible in Agency Counter. This is actually a new planning tool which will be uploaded to our site soon. It will allow any member of the public to draw a boundary within the city that they're interested in. And when any planning applications are submitted within that area, then they receive an automatic notification. So it's actually a little bit better than our development tracker, which is currently being used online. All SB 9 projects will be subject to objective standards as required by state law and previously mentioned. One of those will be that new construction will need to meet our infill housing design standards. This is a 37-page document. It's currently available on our city website, and the standards include items like site design, landscaping, lighting, fencing, drainage, parking, things of that nature. The city is going to require that new construction have a 4-foot setback for the interior and the rear property lines. It also will require front and street side setbacks to meet our standard requirements. And in general, that's like a 25-foot front setback and about a 12.5-foot street side if it's on the corner. Lot coverage requirements, which is in general the 40% maximum of the lot, those will apply to development with the exception that if new dwellings are 800 square feet or less, we wouldn't apply that standard, and that's per state law. We will require 1 parking space per dwelling unit. But again, per state law, we can't require parking in cases where the site is within a half mile of transit or a block of car share site. We will be applying the objective subdivision standards such as these. These are actually directly out of the state law. And I think that the 1,200 square foot minimum had been previously mentioned. Also, there's a requirement that the lot sizes, when you're splitting a lot into 2, that they remain somewhat original to the original lot size. In the city of Sacramento, we're going to restrict each lot to 2 units only. So no additional ADUs or junior ADUs are going to be allowed. Also, any new dwellings created by SB 9 cannot be used for Airbnb or other types of commercial purposes. And applicants will be required to confirm that there are no applicable CC&Rs or HOA rules that would prohibit utilizing SB 9 for their property as a part of our project review. And I'm going to hand it over now to Matt, and he's going to give part 2.
Great, thank you, Evan. So good evening, my name is Matt Hurdle with the city's planning division as well. And since SB 9 becomes effective on January 1, we are working diligently to be ready to process applications and to inform the community of the new state requirements. So we are in the process of creating a web page, and we'll have relevant information such as an FAQ. We will also be hosting a couple of citywide webinars about SB 9. And early next week, we'll be sending out an email blast with all of this information. An emergency ordinance is tentatively scheduled to go to City Council on Tuesday, December 14th at 2 p.m. Next slide. And we are over 2 years into a 3-year planning process for updating the city's general plan. This past January, our city council directed staff to proceed with the key strategies for the purpose of preparing the 2040 draft general plan. And this includes the key strategy of permitting a greater array of housing types in single unit neighborhoods. And the next step for the 2040 general plan is the release of the public review draft, now anticipated for early 2022. We are also using a grant that we got from the Sacramento Area Council of Governments to bring on a consultant team to assist planning staff with conducting additional analysis, neighborhood level engagement, and provide recommendations for development standards for missing middle housing types, such as duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes. This analysis will account for the 2040 general plan key strategy, the city's ADU ordinance, and the provisions of SB 9. And once this analysis is completed and the 2040 general plan is adopted by the city council, staff will present recommended changes to the city's planning and development code to allow a greater array of housing types. And with that, that concludes our presentation. And I will put in the chat our frequently asked questions document for a greater array of housing types for more information. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. And also maybe if you have a link to the PowerPoints that you guys just had that you could put in the chat, that would be great too. So our next speaker is Councilmember Jeff Harris represents East Sacramento, River Park, and some areas kind of north of there. So Jeff, thank you again for being here.
Thank you, Maggie. You know, this densification issue is really becoming a hot button topic, and for good reasons. And I'm aware of I think, most of them. I've heard many opinions about what densification can mean or not mean. I'm also very aware of our housing needs in the city. Just by way of background, I was the architect of our current tree ordinance, one of the principal architects of our current tree ordinance, and I've been pushing for our urban forestry master plan for years now, and have, of course, been on the committee to look at those considerations. I was also on the committee to build our ADU ordinance, which was basically a reaction to state legislation very similar to this process with SB 9. If you read the B, you know that I'm a pretty big proponent of ADUs. I'm building one in my backyard in River Park. And I think that they can actually provide a lot of housing stock in our city. It's proven to be so in Southern California and other areas where ADUs have been widely embraced. You know, I have a lot of concerns about densification, as anybody who lives in an R1 zone does. I want to tell you, I grew up in inner city LA. I grew up in multifamily housing my whole life through high school. It was a concrete jungle. There was virtually no tree canopy where I grew up. I know what that's like in terms of housing and living in an urban environment without the amenities that people would like. I moved to River Park because of the tree canopy. It's second to none in the city. I wanted a little bit of elbow room. I wanted to be close in. I wanted to have my own home. I didn't want it to be noisy. For all the reasons that people buy in R1 zoning, that's really me. And, you know, I've lived in my same house in River Park for 34 years now. And all the things that I wanted to achieve by buying in that neighborhood, I have really enjoyed, you know, the open space, the canopy, etc. I have many concerns about densification, the wide array of housing types proposed by staff, and then now with Scott Wiener's bill, SB 9. You know, Kate Riley brought up a very serious concern of mine, which is canopy coverage goals. And I've talked with planning staff about this. This is something that I think we need to give very serious thought to. If we have a canopy coverage goal that we can't meet because of densification, then we have a problem and we need to solve it. Also, the parking considerations are troublesome from the state law. For instance, if you say that there's no parking requirement within a half mile of transit, well, here's an example. Route 34, bus route 34 in River Park is pretty much a completely dysfunctional bus route, but being within a half a mile of it would encompass all of River Park. And I can tell you, if there was substantial densification in my area, parking would definitely be a problem. And one thing that hasn't been raised here yet is very practical concern, which is putting out your garbage cans on trash day. If you have 4 units on what was once a single family lot, you know, you could have 12 cans out in an area where there might be 2 parking spaces. It simply won't work. So we need to find solutions to those kinds of issues. Having built an ADU, I can tell you that, you know, change is frightening to a neighborhood that's been very stable for a long time. I worked with my neighbors to address their concerns about privacy. And, you know, they instantly said, is it going to be an Airbnb? What are you going to do with it as a rental, et cetera, et cetera? These are real concerns that need to be worked through. There's another piece here too, which is many of you know that I was the chief proponent for the McKinley Water Vault project. We have a combined sewer system in much of our older part of the city, and certainly a lot of that area is zoned R1. And the issues that we find with the combined sewer system in big rain events is very substantial. We created the McKinley Water Vault and other amenities like that at great expense to solve some of the localized flooding issues and sanitary sewer outflows when there are big rain events, as we just experienced the biggest rain dump in the history of Sacramento by a wide margin, I might add. And happily, the McKinley Vault performed very admirably and saved us from a lot of grief. But by allowing densification in a combined combined system of sewer and stormwater, our conveyance model is going to be a difficult thing. We need to look at that as well. As far as affordability, will this create affordability? I think it can, to a certain extent, affordability by design, meaning smaller units. But look, the fact of the matter remains, all housing stock that we add in Sacramento is welcome because we really do have a housing crisis. This may not be the answer. It is potentially one answer. And, look, as your city councilman, I'm here to listen to your concerns because I'm in the position of making decisions when it comes to the urgency ordinance and then design considerations moving forward. And that's what I'm here to do, to hear your concerns, hear your questions, and let's keep moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Thank you again for coming and for your concerns. So now I'm going to introduce our final speaker. I just want to let people know, if you have questions, please write them, put them in the chat, so we can get to those when the speakers are through. So we're very happy to have Peggy Wang, who's the mayor of Yorba Linda. She's an attorney, but she's got a Sacramento connection. She went to McGeorge Law School and she actually lived in Sacramento's Oak Park neighborhood. So we didn't just get any speaker from Southern California. We have at least a partial Sacramentan here. So anyway, Peggy, thank you very much for coming, and take it away. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I am proud. I have to say, I did live in Sacramento for 9.5 years. So I am, I'm a proud Sacramento. Thank you for having me. I am one of the proponents of the new Brand Juan Mendoza Tripartisan Initiative. Today, actually, right hot off the press, a few minutes before I logged in, the Attorney General's office assigned a ballot title to and title summary to this local land use initiative that we plan on putting it on the November 2022 ballot, hoping to reverse some of the effect of Senate Bill 9 and 10. And the title now is, as provided, is provides that local land use and zoning laws override conflicting state laws, initiative constitutional amendment. That's the actual title. You get a proposition number assigned once you qualify for the ballot. Why did we decide to do this? Over 253 cities wrote to the state legislature to oppose Senate Bill 9, and almost identical amount to oppose Senate Bill 10. It fell on deaf ears. A group of us, the California Alliance of Local Electeds, have came together for over 1.5 years to meet with legislators during the COVID environment to tell them that it is not the city's fault that houses are not being built. We zone, all of us zone for affordable housing in all our housing elements, but we don't build. These bills do not, as you heard many of the speakers tonight, Senate Bill 9 and 10 do not have affordable housing involved in it. So it's really a developer's and investor's dream to split your lots and using cities as an excuse. So what the local land use initiative will do is very simple. And let me see if I can, I'm not very good at grabbing screen, so I'm just going to run to my text here. And what it will do is establish land use policies or zoning regulations and make them local municipal affairs. That's it. And really what it is what kind of government do you want? Do you want a government that's closest to you, like your local city council member, where council member Jeff Harris is shopping at Safeway and you can stop him and have a conversation with him about what's going on in your neighborhood? Or for someone like me in Yorba Linda, I would have to jump over hoops hoping that my senator or my assemblyman will answer my call, and neither of them live in my city. But I can tell you, every Sunday afternoon, my residents know where to find me at Trader Joe's, and it's often a sidebar conversation with a council member. But that is us being held accountable to our residents and understanding their needs. The other thing that oftentimes as council members, we know there are competing property rights. The problem with Senate Bill 9 and 10 is, specifically Senate Bill 9, you heard development by right. Who's right? the person who owns that piece of property that wants to be their lot split. But what about the property rights of the people living next door to them, across from them, the people in their neighborhood that would be devastated, or maybe their lot would be improved? Depends on which, how you want to view it. What we do a lot of time right now before Senate Bill 9 came along is when we have competing property rights, we really try, at least here in Yorba Linda, we try to help our neighbors mediate. And we respect everybody's property rights. Everybody's property rights are equal, and we want them to work it out. The Senate Bill 9, what it has done is making one property right a greater or surpass everybody else's right. What the local initiative seeks to do is just really return it back to what it has always been, land use being a local municipal affair, taking it out of the state interest. And, why are we involved in all this and why we think it's so important is you've already heard of this idea of supply and demand, the trickle down theory. If you build a lot of homes, gosh, it should bring the prices down. If that were to be true, Vancouver, New York City, Manhattan, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Tokyo, gosh, they have to be the cheapest place to live. They can't be the most expensive place to live. So there is a really, to me, and many view this as crony capitalism for the developers, right? And you've already read it. If you haven't paid attention to it, I would suggest that you look at Wall Street Journal. They had an article over the summer that said, soon your next door neighbor is a venture capitalist. They're buying up homes. Zillow bought 7,000 homes off the market, and now they discovered that, wow, that was a bad place, so they're going to dump it. Redfin last year bought out thousands of homes as well, driving up the prices. In Southern California, in San Diego, Blackstone came in and bought $100 million worth of apartments, townhomes, and single-family homes. These are all investor driven. We don't know what they're going to do with that $100 million, but I can assure you they're not going to make those affordable housing units. That's for sure. And if they were holding on to the single family homes, only developers and investors have the ability truly to pay off the mortgage that could be on a single family home before it's split, because no bank is going to let you split that lot with the mortgage still on that single family home. You have to pay it off and then develop it. But what we feel and the proponents of this initiative believe that at the end of the day, it should be local control. It should be what you, the neighbors, feel is right for your city, your neighborhood. And I hope this doesn't offend anyone, but really get Sacramento out of our towns. I know the state legislatures in your town, it's a little bit hard to kick them out, but here in the rest of the state, we just want our opportunity to build our communities, work as hard as we have been on providing affordable housing without crony capitalism involved. You cannot build affordable housing if it's crony capitalism. And what does that mean? That means developers greasing lining the pockets of legislators and the governor's office with lots of money and passing these bills, and to the detriment of our neighborhoods. And I want to make it very clear what this initiative will not do. This initiative will not override CEQA. This initiative will not override fair housing laws. And that is very important because already we heard all this misinformation that this is going to, turn back the clock back to redlining, and that's not true. We have put in the initiative language that it will not overwrite these type of laws. But so I want to make that clear. It is only dealing with land use. And lastly, in Senate Bill 10, this initiative will also override Senate Bill 10. Mainly, one of the problems with Senate Bill 10, they keep telling you that you can opt in. The only thing is that when you are a city like mine, where you have ballot initiative, ballot zone, ballot box zoning, where the people get to decide on the zoning, it is wrong to have a 3-2 council override the citizens initiative. That allows big money to play at the city council to elect only people who were going to override that citizen initiative. And so this initiative will also override Senate Bill 10. I see I have 30 seconds remaining. I'm open to questions. There are a lot on this issue. We are trying to get 1.34 million signatures. Love to have your help, and as well as your financial support as we get this matter onto the ballot. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peggy. I wondered if you could just very briefly mention the lawsuits.
Yes, so there are a couple of lawsuits going on. One is by the Housing is a Human Right organization that is backed by the AIDS Health Foundation. They are suing the HCD over Senate Bill 10, stating that it is unconstitutional for a city council or board of supervisors to override voter initiatives. That's one lawsuit. The second lawsuit is right now the Orange County Council of Government has sued HCD with Southern California Association of Government, being the real party in interest, over the MRENA methodology. Just to briefly let you know, Embarcadero Institute have demonstrated by numbers and facts that the state actually double counted the number of housing vacancy rate in the housing unit needed here in California. The Embarcadero Institute's number is actually backed by Freddie Mac, as well as last week, Moody's came out with their own analysis, very much in line with Embarcadero Institute study, which is under 1 million vacancy, 1 million shortage here in California, not the 3.3 that the governor has put out. So OCOG has sued the state for that.
Thank you very much. We're going to take some questions now. And again, thank you very much, Peggy and Jeff and planners and everybody else who spoke tonight. One of the questions has to do with how this ordinance is going to be developed at the local level. And it's actually directed, Peggy, to the planners. But we raise as an issue the fact that working groups developing ordinances sitting at the table need to have neighborhood associations and others as stakeholders. And I think the language that Evan was using when he was talking about the SB 9 ordinance sounded like it was already developed, but I think from hearing Jeff, it's in the process. So the question here that somebody is asking is, what groups are participating in the development of this SB 9 emergency ordinance?
Good evening. I can take that. Matt Hurdle from City's Planning Department. So as Evan and I talked about SB 9, right? So we have to implement it. It's effective January 1st, and it's a mandate, right? So what we are recommending to City Council is, because time is of the essence, it was signed by the governor in mid-September and becomes effective January 1st, is that we would update our planning and development code to be consistent and compliant with the minimum requirements of SB 9. So we're not recommending anything above and beyond what's required by state law. And therefore, we're moving forward with the emergency ordinance. With that said, we're going to have the mechanisms that we talked about in the presentation. We are having an FAQ that will be sent out, a webpage, and webinars to hear from folks about the legislation and make sure we provide information on what's required by state law. So we're moving pretty quickly over the next month or so we can be consistent with this timeline and get it in place, because we have to start accepting applications as early as January 1st. So if someone comes into planning counter virtually and wants to do something under what's allowed under SB 9, we'd have to allow that. And so we have to put that mechanism in place pretty quickly. But with But in terms of the overall approach, what we're recommending with missing middle and great array of housing types, we're going to have the next year and a half to really work together and dial that in, and consider SB9, consider ADUs, and consider the direction we've received unanimously from City Council to date to move forward with the key strategy of great array of housing types. So we're looking forward to much more outreach, neighborhood level engagement as we move forward on those development standards in the next year plus.
Thank you, Matt. I want to just kick this question to Jeff too. I think this issue of neighborhood associations being considered as formal stakeholders, being part of these working groups, we have been excluded from, the housing element. There wasn't enough done on the ADUs. What's your position on that? How do neighborhood advocates, neighborhood groups get involved so that they are actually able to sit at the table when these ordinances are being developed?
Well, Maggie, it's an interesting question. First, I'd like to say that if I was on the legislature, I would have voted against SB9. I agree with Peggy that land use decisions should be local. I don't like to have, those decisions being made from a higher body. I think that it's more appropriate to have it at the municipal level. As far as neighborhood associations being stakeholders, certainly they have to have a voice, and that's I think where I come in. As we go through the development standards, as we move through this process over the next year, I intend to hold an awful lot of community forums to gather the concerns and the voices of people in my neighborhoods and then bring them to council. There are differing opinions about how to move forward with this. Right now, I'm walking both sides of the fence. I see some benefits to some densification, but there are limits that we should and must impose on that. For instance, tree canopy, open space. There are conflicting goals that when you look at them solely from a housing lens, you don't get the complete picture. So, as far as having a seat at the table and being decision makers, too many decision makers, you can't make a decision. But having a voice, that's where it comes into play, where you have a representative. That's me. I sit on the city council, and I need to represent the collective voice of my constituents, and that's what I intend to do.
Well, I don't want to belabor this because we do have another question, but I do want to point out that we know that developers and other groups and individuals are sitting in groups, and they did with the housing element, and neighborhood associations were excluded. I'm not going to belabor this because we do have another question, but I think this is an ongoing issue. This is another question, and I don't know whether Peggy can answer this or one of the planners, or maybe even Jeff or somebody else. How do SB9 and SB10 affect existing or future HOA housing developments?
I can answer this one. SB9 does not override CC&Rs or HOA requirements. SB10 has been, the legislature have added that provision. And just to clarify, the city does not have any immediate plans to use SB10. It's a tool provided to all jurisdictions when they're looking at rezoning land to create more opportunities for affordable housing. We do have a policy in the housing element program to look at high resource areas and rezone sites for affordable housing development because we have a shortage of vacant and available land for affordable housing. But whether or not we use SB10, there's limitations on units in a lot. Whether we use that tool or not, it's going to be quite a lot of outreach when we look to rezone any sites in these areas. And that would be starting late next year, if at all. Or
Peggy, do you want to add to that? Or?
Oh yeah, I just want to add that there is a California homeowners association, and they, it's my understanding that Senator Atkins, that's President Pro Tem, had written a letter to that association to clearly state that HOAs, CC&Rs will not be overwritten by Senate Bill 9. That was a huge win for the Realtors Association, as well as the idea that you have to have someone in after the lot is split, the owner must live there for 3 years. That's an owner occupancy. The question is enforceability. I don't think it's going to be enforceable. I spoke to a legislator who voted for SB 9 because that was put in there. And I asked her, well, who do you think will be enforcing that? Well, the city attorney. And then, well, city attorneys only prosecute misdemeanors. Your felonies are actually prosecuted by the district attorneys. So if a district attorney is looking at a kidnapping case or an assault case, that would probably take precedence over a perjury case, which I don't know about other counties, but here in Southern California, the Los Angeles County's district attorney does not even prosecute gangs for gang enhancement or firearm enhancement. So it's pretty doubtful he'll even prosecute a minor crime like perjury. When I alerted that to the legislator, she was really surprised because she thought it was a city attorney who will be prosecuting. So I think that it's going to be a very difficult enforceable bill. If anybody is thinking that that will help prevent investors from coming in and buying up and then renting it out, that's not going to be true. It will be easy for them to skirt that requirement.
Thank you. We've got a couple questions about how, SB 9 and the general plan can help provide more affordable housing besides creating presumably smaller units. And one of those questions is about inclusionary zoning. And so I don't know if you want to speak to that. Councilmember Harris, are you in favor of inclusionary zoning? Do you see the possibility of having a requirement that units under SB 9 be affordable? So that's the question. You're muted. You gotta unmute.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
I wanted to ask staff if that's even possible to do under SB 9. I'm not certain that it is. We do have a dearth of affordable housing, certainly, but I'm not sure that that is the best course to apply. So Greg, can you address that, Greg or Matt?
Evan, I don't know if you're available. He's read the ordinance a little bit more. That has been recommended by some groups, but I don't know if Evan's able to answer the question, or Matt, if you have
I don't think that SB 9 prohibits an affordability component.
I think the trick is whether we can require it specifically on SB 9 projects, as opposed to all such projects similar. There are some issues with honing in on a specific thing like a SB 35 process to have specific requirements and standards for projects under that legislation. So it's something we can look at and confirm. And I'll just note a lot of these good questions we have, we'll continue to add on to our FAQ as we get them. And when we have our 2 workshops in mid-November, which are going to be recorded, we'll continue to build on our FAQ.
I think you started to answer this question or answered it partially, Peggy, but I was just going to ask it again. What is the city council doing to control the private equity firms from impacting Sacramento's housing market? Well, you raised the issue, I should say. These firms are paying cash and outbidding families trying to purchase a home. So, Jeff,
That is
planners, go ahead.
well, and that's really our problem. How do we stop them from doing that? Especially when you already know Blackstone, Redfin, Zillow, and a group Pasco. I think that's a new online residential house realtor. I don't know how you can stop at this point, at this time, because SB 9's idea of preventing investors from profiting is not enforceable. you would have to have a very strong district attorney who's willing to give up some of his or her resources to go after, perjury cases, specifically on SB 9. So I think it would be difficult to keep the investors away. And I don't know how it is in Sacramento, but if you're in LA County, perjury, I can see them either not filing, or they said, hey, we'll strike a deal and it'll be probation, pay a fine, and goodbye. And that's it. And to me, that's just a fix-it ticket. I think it'll be a huge problem for all of us. It was a question that my group, Kelly, had posed to Senator Wiener, and he said, well, I would say, he kind of skirted it around at the time, and he said something like, well, everyone has a right to invest. And I think he had trouble trying to answer that question because he didn't know how to go around it. And so I think that I can tell you we raised the question, but it did not appear that the legislators were interested in answering or preventing the problem.
I'll just
Jeff,
add, in this
yeah.
jurisdiction, we have an exemption for the housing impact fee if you are an owner builder. And we do track the names of owners that request that exemption. We have a little tracking sheet. And so there's ways of tracking it. But we'll just see how many applications we get in. And I'll just note, as I saw in the presentation, we would be charging our standard fees on all these developments for infrastructure, for if it's the affordable housing fee or the like. So just to clarify that.
Jeff, right.
Yeah, please. So, one of the impediments to just wholesale densification development is the cost of building the housing. And, staff and I have talked about doing a study about what it would take to pencil to, say, split a lot, build 2 duplexes and make that work. I think Peggy brought up a nuance that I was not aware of in terms of this being a felony prosecution and going to the DA's office. I tend to agree with you that the idea that having a live-in owner sounds really good, at the outset, but if it is not an enforceable situation, that could certainly lead to a problem. I'm still banking on the idea that building these duplexes is really not going to pencil out. Again, I'm trying to keep an open mind and look into the future about how this can play out and maintain as much discretion at the local level as we possibly can. To me, that's key. I think our planners have delineated already that they are not interested in looking at ADUs, in the SB 9 situation. I would certainly agree with that. There is a level of practicality here. I mean, look, when I look at, say, River Park, where there are a lot of duplexes, there are a lot of multifamily units and a lot of single family homes, it's actually a nicely designed community that works. There's room for a little bit more densification, but not a lot in terms of being practical. Now, how to get to there from here is definitely a problem. It's exacerbated by SB 9. Again, I know Scott Wiener, and I've talked to him about housing stock and ways to increase it. I think this painted with way too broad a brushstroke, and I think it's problematic. We really need to focus on how to rein it in and make it practical, within our neighborhoods and within our city.
We're going to thank you, Councilmember Harris. We're going to take a couple more questions. Trying to paraphrase here, there's a question which deals with the parking issue and this issue of, in my opinion, very weakly defined transit areas. One of the things that we noted is that bus service that happens to run every 15 minutes during rush hour doesn't help a lot of people who don't work on that commute schedule, as well as other things. The question here is about defining transit-rich areas. Let's see. And is there some leeway there? And should a qualified car sharing site be defined by contract between the city and the service provider? I mean, this idea that you're a block away from a shared car applies to anybody. So it's fairly loose, the parking stuff. So can you comment on that? We'll start with you, Councilmember Harris, and then we'll open it up.
Well, I agree with you. That is a very loose definition. I mean, car share, usually right now, car share in Sacramento is kind of a mobile installation, right? It's not like there's a hub where cars are all returned to, because that's not how it works. Cars are placed out in the field and they're left out in the field, and people encounter the cars out there. So I'm not sure where we're going to go with that. And I'd be interested in planning staff response to that. It doesn't seem like a reasonable parameter to, exclude on-site parking because of the possibility of a car share car being in the neighborhood. Any thoughts from you guys?
Yeah, it's a difficult provision to interpret and implement. I think in terms of a car share space like that, you can actually identify as more of like a zip car space with a sign and a dedicated parking space, which isn't very common these days anymore with the gig cars. So I think it would have to be some type of dedicated space as opposed to just any old space you can drop a gig car off. We do have the gig cars range, which is defined. I think down in Southland Park, it hits Vote in Southland Park. There's a southern boundary on that, but it's a good point to clarify. And as far as the proximity to transit, Evan, I don't know if is it the same as what ADU state law requires, or is it a little bit different the way it's written, law?
I believe it was similar to the ADU. Matt, did you know the answer to that one?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, we're going through the analysis process now. And so as we move forward, we'll have, our interpretation of what the state requires for this. So part of it is, when legislation gets passed, there's an agency that's tasked with providing guidelines for that legislation, but that guideline will be developed typically after the effective date. So we are doing the analysis and we'll have that recommendation, for council and hopefully earlier in terms of our interpretation of the legislation.
And I'll just note the emergency ordinance that we do adopt has a sunset date. So just like with the ADU ordinance. So what we adopt on that will be effective on January 1st is something that we certainly can modify as we get more state guidance.
Hopefully local guidance. Anyway, I again appreciate everybody being here. I think let's just let speakers, if they've got any closing remarks. There's some other questions in the chat, but they're actually sort of fairly detailed things that maybe we can get back to people about. So let's see. Chris, are you still with us? Chris Jones. I don't know if Chris Jones is
Yeah, I'm
with
still here. Mhm.
Okay, do you have any just closing statements, closing remarks, thoughts?
Yeah, just that we need to make sure that we really act in a way that has the end goal in mind. And we need to take into account, like everyone said, parking, affordability, future electric car mandates, because you aren't going to be able to plug in your car like, 2 houses down. That doesn't work. We just need to make sure that all of our suite of policies and plans converge at the end state and not operate at cross purposes with ourselves.
Thank you, Chris. Kate, do you have any kind of closing thoughts?
Just real fast, I appreciate everything I learned here tonight, and I just hope that our planning staff and the council member will make sure to protect the tree canopy goals as they're implementing these programs.
Thank you. One of the questions I didn't get to was about parks, and somebody mentioned that parks hadn't come up in the densification, although I'm sure they're part of the same thinking on that. How about Evan or Matt? Any closing remarks, closing comments?
I'll just say thank you for your time and looking forward to getting the information out to you and having this conversation as we move forward. And I did drop the frequently asked questions into the chat. I would encourage everyone to take a look at that and read it in entirety. We respond and to many of the questions that you've raised today, including the tree canopy, which is an absolute goal and a key strategy of the general plan. We have very specific targets for increasing our tree canopy through our climate action adaptation plan. So that not mutually exclusive there to meet our housing goals and our tree canopy goals. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Matt. And everybody can't see the chat. So maybe Patricia, can you save it so that we can share the questions and the links that are in the chat, and we can put those on the Save Sacramento Neighborhoods website. Evan, did you have any last thoughts, or you still
Just
here with me?
echoing what Matt said, and thank you for the invite.
Okay, so Councilmember Harris.
Yeah, thank you, Maggie. Hey, this is a really good discussion about a pretty nuanced and deep topic. There are a lot of concerns raised here tonight, and I can tell you that I work with planning staff a lot. I talk to all three of these gentlemen very often, weekly it seems, or oftener. These are serious concerns that are raised. We will work to address every single one of them to make sure that you feel like your voices are heard. Again, this is a process. Nothing is completely decided yet, except that the fact that SB 9 passed. But we have a lot of work to do in terms of design parameters, how we alter our planning and development code. I intend to have public forums before the adoption of the general plan, after the draft is released, before we get to the planning and development code changes, and to address every one of these questions. I'd like to thank Peggy because I learned something tonight, and I really appreciate that. Really good discussion, lots of work to do moving ahead, and I think that we can do it together.
Thank you very much. I didn't mean to skip over you, Greg. Did you want to say any last comments?
Yeah, I appreciate all your time and look forward to additional questions and working with folks in the next year. I think the key thing is we're going to help define what this looks like together, what these units look like, the scale, the size, the design, how they can encourage tree canopy, address garbage recycling, and the like. So I think a big important part about this outreach and this dialogue is to have something we can all look at to see what this ends up looking like when it's built.
Thank you. And Mayor Wang, again, you have to unmute. Thank you for making the trip, the virtual trip up from Southern California back to your old haunts here in Sacramento. Do you have any closing comments?
Well, I miss Sacramento. My husband had to propose and drag me down here in Orange County. If that didn't happen, I would still be in Sacramento. But thank you so much for letting me join you and inviting me here tonight. I learned so much from you. In fact, while all of you were presenting, I sent a email to my planning director to contact the Sacramento Planning Department, because I think what you're putting forward is a very interesting idea, something that the city of Yorba Linda can pursue. So thank you so much for sharing that. I think that's what was missing in all this discussion is local electeds actually working together to solve the problem. We actually can do that. And understanding each other instead of a one size fits all, we can really help each other and to achieve what is desperately needed in our state, which is affordable housing, especially the missing middle. So I look forward to working with all of you and hope that you will look. I did put in the chat and you can share with everyone, Maggie, the website for the local land use initiative that we want to set forward. We think that the land use and planning should be in the hands of your city council. And I know Councilman Harris is really, and the planning directors you have here, you guys really know this stuff, what's good for your neighborhood, and that's where it belongs. And so thank you so much. I'm always available, so please feel free to contact me. Thank you.
Thank you again. And again, we will put the chat information on the Save Sacramento Neighborhoods website, savesacramentoneighborhoods.org. And there is already a link to the initiative on that website. So I want to just thank everybody who came and thank you for all the questions. Again, there were a number of sort of detailed questions that I will pass on to planners so that we can get those answered. Let's hope we have more rain up here in Northern California. And thank you again. And we look forward to, participating in this process. And I really appreciate that being echoed by Councilmember Harris and by you, Greg. It is important that the public have a voice and that we are sitting at the table and that we are part of this process. And it's yes, we need to talk to our city council people, absolutely, but we've got to be engaged in a bigger way than just that. So again, appreciate your being here, everybody. And unless anybody has anything else, I think we can wrap it up. But thank you very much again.
Thank you so much.
Good night, everyone.
Everybody.
Good night.
Good night.